Hi, everyone. Glad you could join us this Shabbat for this week's teaching, whether you are in person or watching online or watching this later. So I'm glad that everyone could be with us. So let's just start first with a word of prayer. Abba, Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for this time of getting together. Father, I thank you that you have opened our eyes to your truth and your Torah. Father, help us today to learn from this week's Parsha. Father, give us wisdom and how we can apply this to our lives, Father, and help us to walk them out and be a better witness of you. Let your light shine through us during this day, during this walk, during throughout our days of the rest of this year, Father. Let us be a walking menorah for you. In Yeshua's name we pray. Amen. So this week's Parsha is called Vayeshev. And it's from the Torah portion in Genesis 37, verse 1 through 40 and verse 23. The Haftorah comes from Amos, chapter 2, verse 6 through chapter 3, verse 8. And this week's Parsha, the focus sort of shifts from Abraham to and Yitzhak and Yaakov and all the stories that we've had so far in Genesis. And now the focus is shifting to Joseph. And he becomes the main character through the rest of the book of Bereshit or Genesis. And, in this parsha, we see it deals with this story of the coat of many colors, how Joseph is taken down into Mitzrayim or Egypt. We can see the encounter he has with Potiphar's wife and him being imprisoned. And then we also have like a side story of what's happening with Yehuda and Tamar. And then it continues on with this conflict between the brothers here. So as we begin this parsha, we're going to start with Yaakov settling in the land of Canaan, while Esau, of course, went off to Edom. So we're going to start in Genesis 37, and I'm going to start in the first verse. Okay, so Genesis 37, verse 1. And Yaakov continued living in the land where his father had lived as a foreigner, the land of Canaan. And here is the Toldot, the history of Yaakov. When Joseph was 17 years old, he used to pasture the flock with his brothers, even though he was still a boy. Once, when he was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, he brought a bad report about them to their father. Now, Israel loved Joseph most of all of his children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a long-sleeved robe. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they began to hate him and reached the point where they couldn't even talk to him in a civil manner. And Joseph had a dream which he told his brothers that made them hate him all the more. And he said to them, "Listen, while I tell you about this dream of mine. When we were tying up bundles of wheat in the field, when suddenly my bundle got caught up by itself and stood upright, and then your bundles came and gathered around mine and prostrated themselves before it." His brothers retorted, "Yes, you will certainly be our king. You'll do a great job of bossing us around." And they hated him still more for his dreams and for what he said. Okay, so let's stop right there. And the verse 8, so we finished through verse 8. And so, like I said, the name of this parsha is Vayeshev. And Vayeshev means and he dwells or dwelt. Yeshev is, from the root Yeshav, which means to dwell or to sit or to remain or to abide. And it seems like Yaakov is wanting to settle down finally. If you think about Abraham, he was a wanderer. We see the same going on, that they're moving from place to place. And yet here we see Yaakov and he's like wanting to settle down. And yet we see that, this peace or this tranquility seems to be interrupted because of what's going to happen with his most beloved son, Joseph. And there's a midrash actually that says Yaakov's mission was not yet complete. The sages say that once Yaakov, fathered the 12 tribes, he had survived his exile with Lavan, his confrontation he survived with Esau, and he endured the trials with the men of Shechem, and he had finished his task of preparing, this way for the future of the nation of Israel, and he went through all of that. He's thinking, okay, I've done my task. Yet Yah saw otherwise, and Yaakov's mission was not yet complete. And so the trials that Yaakov has to endure are the steps to ensure that Israel's descent into Mitzrayim, into Egypt, still will happen. And it's, all to fulfill Yah's plan. And so what, Yaakov here is thinking, okay, I'm done. My mission, my job is done, and I can settle down finally and have this peace and tranquility. And yet Yah's plan was not done. And it was to lead him down a different path, where Israel was going to descend into Mitzrayim. Actually, if we go over to the Brit Hadashah, let's go to Acts chapter 14 a minute. So we're going to go to Acts chapter 14 and verse 22. Okay. Acts 14, verse 22. It says, strengthening the Talmudim and encourage them to remain true to the faith, and reminding them that it is through many hardships that we must enter the kingdom of Elohim. And so here in this Parsha, this story is not only an account of what happens to Yosef, but it's also a prophetic picture. The generations or the Toldot of Yaakov, it begins with Yosef. And like I said, Yosef is going to be the focus for the rest of the book of Bereshit. And it's going to come, we know he's going to be renamed, he is renamed Israel, but it's going to come with these trials. And that here, we get this encouragement that, to remain in the faith and encourage each other, that it is necessary for us to go through some of these trials. And you think about, Yaakov's thinking he can settle down now that he's got all of these 12 sons and the future of Israel is set, but yet there are more trials to come. And first we see here that his generation, his history begins with his most beloved son, Joseph. And we see in the first passages that I just read, verse 1 through 8, that Joseph was a young man of 17. And one important thing we see here is that he is tending the flock. He is out there being a shepherd, a roe in Hebrew. And so Joseph is out tending the flock. This isn't his flock, but it's the flock of his father. And while he's out there, of course, he sees something going on that shouldn't have happened or that shouldn't be happening. And Joseph brings back this evil report to his father. And of course, by going back and telling his father what his brothers are doing, we think of it like tattling. This act is going to bring animosity with the rest of the family, with the rest of his brothers. And they're definitely going to have this bad feeling toward him. And like I said, this picture of the story of Yosef has multiple prophetic pictures. Not only does it represent what happened at that time with Yosef and his family, but Yosef is also a picture of Yeshua. And we know that just like Yosef, he's a shepherd, and he's the good shepherd, and he's all about tending the flock of his father. In the Brit Hadashah in John chapter 10, in verse 11. So John 10 and verse 11, it says, Yeshua says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep or for the sheep. And so here, that is what Yeshua does. Yeshua lays down his life for his sheep. Also, we see in Mark chapter 6. I'm going to go to Mark chapter 6 and verse 34. We see that when Yeshua came ashore, he saw a huge crowd and filled with compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began teaching them many things. So the shepherd, this good shepherd, is going to be concerned for the sheep. And that's what we see Joseph doing, that he became concerned for the sheep. And he saw what his brothers were doing and what they weren't doing. So obviously, they probably weren't taking care of the sheep. Maybe they weren't feeding the sheep, or they weren't watering them like they should have been. And just like Yeshua saw this crowd and he saw they were without a shepherd. And so he started feeding his sheep. Just like Joseph was the most loved or beloved of his father, Yeshua was loved by the Father. And just like Joseph, he was despised and rejected by his brothers. Yeshua was despised and rejected by his brothers too. And we also see this coming up in John, again, in John chapter 1 and verse 11, we see the reference to Yeshua. That's John 1 and verse 11. It says, he came to his own homeland, yet his own people did not receive him. And in John chapter 15, if we go over a few chapters, we see that he also says, if I had not done in their presence works, that's John 15, verse 24, which no one else ever did, they would not be guilty of sin. But now they have seen them, and they have both hated me and my Father. But this has happened in order to fulfill the words of the Torah, which read, they hated me for no reason at all. So just like, Joseph was hated because of the love of his father, Yeshua was hated because of the love of the Father. So there's lots of parallels there. And then we also see that, this contention that the brothers and Joseph have, it's played out not only in that time period, but we see it played out multiple times in history. And it's all stemming from, these brothers are from 4 different mothers. And so even though, technically, Zilpah and Bilhah were the handmaidens, and it was like having a surrogate mother through, for Leah and Rachel, that we know that, it all stems from the love that was shown to Rachel, as opposed to Leah. And we know that because of Reuben's sin, his firstborn rights are actually transferred. And we see that, they're actually, because the firstborn has multiple roles here. There's multiple blessings of the firstborn. And there is, the right of the priesthood. And we see that the priesthood actually goes to Leah's third son, which is Levi. The kingship, the one who is the king, the leader of the family, the kingship is going to Leah's fourth son, which is going to be Yehuda. And we see the birthright, the double portion, the double blessing there of the father's heritage. That one is actually going to Joseph. So that firstborn blessing, which ends up having 3 parts there, is broken up. And we see actually it's handed out for 3 different brothers. And in this Parsha, we'll end up seeing it really focuses on 2 of the brothers. It focuses on Joseph and Yehuda. And, these 2 brothers end up being like a picture of the southern house, of the southern kingdom, which is called Judah, which is where we get Jews today. And the house of Joseph, which is also called the house of Israel or house of Ephraim, which is the northern kingdom, the scattered lost tribes lost tribes that are hidden within the nations or within the church today. And so the contention between these two still continues today. And even though it happened then, it still plays out multiple times in history. And on another level, like we see a picture of Joseph, like I said, being this northern kingdom, the house of Israel or Ephraim. And think about Joseph. Okay. Joseph, was a picture of the good shepherd. And when Joseph was sold into slavery, he went to Egypt, Mitzrayim. And what happened? So he was the good shepherd. The other brothers weren't really good shepherds. The rest of his brothers, the rest of the sons of Israel here, the rest of Israel, the other 11 tribes, were basically without a shepherd. Okay. And that's exactly what is prophesied in First Kings. So let's go there. In First Kings chapter 22, Micaiah actually prophesies that the children of Israel, Bnei Israel, are going to be like sheep without a shepherd. So in First Kings chapter 22, and I'll give you a second to get there, in verse 17. Okay, First Kings 22, verse 17. Okay, and that says, then he said, I saw all Israel scattered over the hills like sheep without a shepherd. And Yah said, these men have no leader. Let everyone go home in peace. And so, think about, we are a part of the house of Joseph. We are a part of Ephraim or Israel. And being grafted in, we have the love of the Father. And similarly, sorry, I'm having a hard time talking. Similarly, we have a role and a mission to accomplish. And that role is very important. That role, being grafted in, is to bring our brothers to jealousy. Okay. In Romans chapter 11 and verse 11, in Romans 11 and verse 11, it says, in that case, I say, isn't it that they have stumbled with the result that they have permanently fallen away? Heaven forbid. So they haven't permanently fallen away. Quite the contrary. It is by means of their stumbling that the deliverance has come to the nations in order to provoke them to jealousy. And so here is what our role or our function is. It is to provoke our brothers, the rest of Israel, to jealousy. Okay. So, like I said, there's multiple layers of this being played out. Now, let's go back to the story, what was actually happening here with Joseph. And we see that Joseph, is the most loved son of Yaakov. And in verse 3, it said that Joseph was the son of his old age. And the phrase in Hebrew is Ben Zenukim. Okay. And there are different interpretations for this phrase. First of all, we know that Benjamin was the last son. He was really the son of his old age. But we see Joseph here is called the son, the Ben Zenokim. And also Yaakov, and Joseph, all of his older brothers were all close in age to each other. So why exactly would Joseph be referred to the son of his old age? And part of it, I think, is what is related to this word age here, or being old age, Zenukim. Zenukim also means wise or wisdom. So when it says that Joseph was the son of his old age, Ben Zenukim, it can also mean that Joseph, he recognized that Joseph was the son of wisdom or the wisest son. And of course, if you're, saying that, then it's going to make all the other sons and, Joseph's brothers very jealous. Another meaning is that Ben Zenokim is not really based on his age, like I said, but or attributes, but his position, and that Yaakov was actually designating Yosef to be more of a personal helper or assistant to him as he was older. Because you've got to remember how old Yaakov was. This was not only a position or a function, but it was an honor, for him to be beside him and to be his helper. And it's showing that Yosef is the chosen son. And again, this is going to create jealousy with his other brothers. And then we start going through, one of the most famous things here. And let's look at Genesis 37, verse 3 again. Not only does it say the son of his old age, but it says that he made him a long sleeved robe. That's the way my version reads it, or wrote it. In King James, he says he made him a coat of many colors. Okay. And, this is probably one of the most famous stories of Yosef is this coat of many colors. And in Hebrew, it actually is called ketunet pasim. Ketunet is not really a coat, but it's more like a long tunic. And we see this multiple times in scripture. And the most prominent way that we see this ketunet is actually if we go back to, go forward to Exodus chapter 28, where we're going to see the priest. So let's go to Exodus 28 and verse 4. Okay, so Exodus 28 and verse 4. And it says, these garments they are to make are these: a breastplate, a ritual vest. Okay, so the breastplate, here we've got the Hoshin, and then we've got the ritual vest, which is an ephod, and a robe, a me'il. And then it says a broidered coat, which, or, some versions call it a checkered tunic. And then you have the turban, which is also a meter. And then you've got also what's called a girdle or a sash. So that word, that checkered tunic, is actually a ketonet that they're making. And so this is that long garment. And when we look at this ketonet, there's some interesting revelations that I think can be seen when we look a little deeper in the Hebrew. And I always try to go back to the first mention of the word. And of course, we're in Genesis, so it's got to be in Genesis, but it's going to be a little farther back. If we go back to chapter 3, so Genesis chapter 3, and we're going to go to verse 21, and we see this happens after the fall of Adam. In 3, verse 21, it says, Yah Elohim made garments of skin for Adam and his wife, and he clothed them. Okay, so these garments that he made here, I know the King James called them coats of skin. This is the word ketunet. Okay, so he's actually making them ketunet. So after man's fall, Adam and Hava are made these garments or clothes, which are ketunet. We also see ketunet elsewhere in scripture. Let's go to Isaiah. So I want to go to Isaiah chapter 22. Isaiah 22. And I'll give you just a few minutes to get there. Okay, Isaiah 22, and I'm going to go to verse 20. It says, when that day comes, I will summon my servant, Eliakim, the son of Hilyahu, and I will dress him in your robe, your ketonet, and gird him with your sash of your office, and invest in him your authority, and he will be a father to the people living in Jerusalem and to the house of Yehuda. Okay, so here we see that the Ketunet is linked with authority because he's putting it on him. He's trying to show that this person has the authority. Now, in Genesis 37, where Joseph is made this coat of many colors, the phrase I said was Ketunet Pasim. We actually see that exact phrase used one more time. The other references, like I said, there's multiple references to a Ketunet, but the exact phrase Ketunet Pasim is used in 2 Samuel. So let's go to 2 Samuel chapter 13. Okay, 2 Samuel chapter 13, and I'm going to go to verse 18. Okay, it says she was wearing a long sleeved robe. Okay, and she was wearing a Ketunet Pasim. This is how they used to dress the king's daughters who were virgins. And his servant took her out and he locked the door after her. Okay, so not only are we given this Ketunet Pasim, but we're giving a little bit more description here that this was how the king's daughters who were virgins were also dressed. So this word Ketunet we see used in talking about Adam and Hava's coat of skin. We see it used in Joseph's coat of many colors. We also see it here talking about Tamar, the bride, wears this garment. It's also talking about the garment of the Kohanim, the priest. So hopefully you're starting to get a picture here of the Ketunet, linking all of these together. Because this Ketunet is linked with being a Kohanim, a bride, and one who has authority. So when Yaakov is making this garment for Joseph, it is pointing out that, oh my goodness, he is going to be like the priest. He is going to be, be like the bride here. He is going to be the one who is given the authority. And so we can see the favoritism of Yaakov on Joseph. And if you think, who is a kingdom of Kohanim who's considered the bride and who has authority? Well, Exodus tells us exactly who that is. If we go to Exodus chapter 19 and verse 5, Exodus 19 and verse 5, it says, now, if you will pay careful attention to what I say and keep my covenant, then you will be my own segula, my own special treasure from among all the nations, all the people, for all the earth is mine. And you will be a kingdom of Kohanim for me, a nation set apart. These are the words that you are to speak to the Bnei Israel, the children of Israel. And so the children of Israel are the kingdom of priests. They're the ones that are going to be the bride. They're going to be the ones that are going to be given this authority here. And so, we look at that. We are grafted into that. We are a part of that. We are a part of Israel. So we're looking at these things and thinking that just like Joseph had this, where people are looking at him and despising him, sometimes the world, the nations, people look at us and sort of despise us too. Now, this robe that Joseph has is said to be of many colors. But color in Hebrew is zevah, and that's not what the word says here. It says pasim. And pasim is not the word for color. Pasim actually means like the flat part of your hand or your foot, like your palm or the sole of your foot. It's the flat part. And so this ketunet, this tunic, is actually going to be long enough that is probably touching the wrist and also down to the ankles there. Now, think for a minute about Joseph's role. What was he doing? What was his job? Here he was with his brothers, and they were shepherds. And if you really think about it, if he's wearing a long robe that's coming down to the palm of his hands and all the way down to his ankles, is that really being conducive to the type of work that he would have been doing? If you're out in the field and you're, looking after these sheep, you're probably having to pull these brambles and, make these, put the brambles around the sheep to make it like a barrier for them. It's protecting them from predators. So it's not really conducive for him to be walking and running and trying to do these things. And so it's, that's really not conducive to what his job is. So that makes you wonder, well, wait a minute, what was Yaakov showing his other sons by giving Joseph this ketanet pasim, this, what we call a coat of many colors, that it's actually a sign that Joseph is not going to be the one that's out there doing the difficult work. He's instead going to be one that's overseeing. He's going to be the one that's watching. The others are going to be the hands and the feet. They're going to be the ones that are out there doing it. He is the one that's stepping back. He's like the overseer. He's like in a royal position here. And that, this garment that he's wearing is a garment not for one that is actually doing the action or is serving, but is the one that's being served. So it's lifting Joseph up, and the rest of his brothers are looking at him like, so yeah, you're going to be served, and while the rest of us are out there doing all this work. And then when you're understanding this, we can see that there is, this powerful picture here, because Joseph is a picture of the Mashiach, of Yeshua. And you think about what, this garment that he was given, and think about what Yeshua did. Let's go to the Brit Hadashah. Let's go to Philippians chapter 2. And it's interesting that I'm sitting here thinking that, here we are studying Torah, and most of the passages I think I've read are in the Brit Hadashah so far. So, but that's what the Brit Hadashah is. The Brit Hadashah is showing that this, yes, is the same. It is showing that we're walking it out. It did not change. Okay, so Philippians 2, chapter 2, and verse 5. That's where I want to start. And look at what Yeshua does here. Philippians 2 and 5. Let your attitude toward one another be governed by your being in union with the Messiah Yeshua. Though he was in the form of Elohim, he did not regard equality with Elohim something to be possessed by force. On the contrary, he emptied himself, and that he took the form of a slave by becoming like human beings are. And when he appeared as a human being, so think about this, and when he appeared as a human being, he humbled himself still more by becoming obedient, even to this, to death on the stake as a criminal. And so here we've got this picture of Yeshua. He is, in essence, laying down his royalty. He's laying down that robe that he was given from the Father, that he is coming to serve instead of to be served. And that this is a lesson, I think, for us, that, here we are, we are part of this royal priesthood, and that we must not come lofty and think of ourselves in this high position, but we need to come to serve others. And we need to serve others in love, just like the Mashiach served us, what he did for us. And Yeshua, he laid all of that aside. He didn't come that first time and, as the royal garments, he didn't come to be a king that first time. He came to serve. And just like, here, Joseph received this position and this calling from his father, in his youth. And yet later on, later he would be the one who would end up serving his brothers. He's the one who's going to end up, helping his brothers and in essence saving them. Now, let's keep going. Let's go back to Genesis 37. And I want to break down the dream a little bit. So in Genesis 37 and verse 6, it says, and he said to him, this is his first dream, listen while I'll tell you about this dream of mine. While we were tying up the bundles of wheat in the field, when suddenly my bundle got up and by itself and stood upright, and then your bundles came and gathered around mine and prostrated themselves before it. So, and of course, his brothers retorted, yes, you will certainly be our king. You'll do a great job of bossing us around. And they hated him still more for his dreams and what he said. Now, like I said, I think there's more to this dream than most of us really see revealed. We look at it just on this, one level here. But I'd really like to go into the Hebrew and look at what some of these words are and see if we can see other meanings. The word for sheaf is sorry, I wanted to say another word there and it's not that. Aluma, and alumim is the plural. Okay, and so he's talking about these sheaves, alumim here, and he says his sheaf, the aluma, and his rose up. And so when you think about here, a sheaf is usually in reference to grains, and these grains that are bound together, they're actually wrapped up. But a grain is used for making bread. And so these sheaves are also a symbol of produce and bread, lechem. And we also see, that Joseph's sheaf suddenly stands up. And that word for stand up is coming from that root nasav, which means to be established or appointed. And these other sheaves are gathering around Zenube, and this root that comes from the root sabab, which means to turn or to change or transform. And so these other sheaves are turning or changing or transforming, but they're also bowing down. And that word shakak is the word to bow down. And it is to bow down like you're bowing, but it's also to show homage. And, we can see that, this dream is representing that his brothers are going to be dependent on Joseph. And it's all linked to when there's bread. It's talking about this produce, this bread, this lechem. Well, when there is a time of famine, when Joseph's sheaf is going to stand up, that Joseph, what's going to happen? Joseph's status is going to rise in Mitzrayim, and his brothers are going to be dependent on Joseph, who, of course, is, like Pharaoh's right hand. And he does what? What does Joseph do during that time period in the years of famine? He is the one who is distributing the bread. And what do these sheaves sabab? They are, having to change or transform. Well, these other sheaves are representing his brothers, that the brothers had to change or transform their mind and attitude in order to survive. They had to recognize what this other sheaf, Joseph, was rising. His status was rising. And also, there's another meaning here, because you think about, well, sheaves are not only bread, but grain, but it's also a picture of the harvest. And there's a beautiful Psalms that links this harvest and dreams. So let's go to Psalms 126. there's also a song in Hebrew about this too. Psalms 126 and verse 1. And this is part of the Shir Hamalot, the Song of the Ascents that are sung as you are coming up to Jerusalem and up to the temple. In Psalms 126 and verse 1, it says, when Yah restored Zion's fortunes, we thought we were dreaming, just like Joseph. Okay, we thought we were dreaming, and our mouths were full of laughter, and our tongues shouted for joy. Among the nations, it is said that Yah has done great things for them. Yah did do great things with us, and we are overjoyed. Return our people from the exile. Yah, as streams fill the wadis in the Negev. And so think about, what he's saying here. He's talking about them returning and them actually coming back, and they're so happy coming back that it is like a dream. And it says, those who sow in tears will reap with cries of joy. He who goes out weeping as he carries his sack of seed will come home with cries of joy as he's carrying his sheaves of grain. And so again, we've got the link between these sheaves and these dreams. And it's also connecting to talking about what's happening here. The exiles returning. Well, wait a minute. Who are the exiles? Us, the 10 tribes that are lost amongst the nations. And so within the context of the passage of Psalms 126, it's basically talking about the restoration of the two houses of Israel, when both houses will be restored, and it's going to be like a dream. And the restoration of both of these houses, what are we going to do? We are going to present our harvest to Yah. Now, continuing on, we can go on to another level and continue the pattern and see how Joseph's dream, puts us, another link with the end times. Because what do we know about these end times? If we go to Amos chapter 8, verse 11, and this parallels with Joseph's day, because what was happening in Joseph's day? We end up seeing after he goes to Mitzrayim, we know later, and this is going to be in the following Parsha, that there is going to be a famine. So Amos chapter 8, verse 11, it says, the time is coming, says Yah Elohim, when I will send a famine over the land, but it's not a famine of bread or a thirst for water, but for hearing the words of Yah. And so just like, these end times, Amos is prophesying that in the last days, there is going to be this end time famine. And just like in Joseph's day, there was a famine. It was literally of bread, lechem. But in these end times, could it be that Joseph or Ephraim, the house of Israel, these lost tribes that are in the nations here, are in the world, are the ones who are actually storing up the grain, that we're actually storing up the bread, the word of Yah, and that we're holding it for those who are hungry in these last days. This is another reason I think we need to be full of the Ruach. We need to be a light in these dark times and let the Ruach lead us into sharing the grain with those that are ready to receive it. Sometimes we get all excited, just like Joseph, and we share something in our excitement. And sometimes that can cause, others to totally shun away from it. So sometimes in our zeal, we can actually do the opposite. We can push people farther away. So that's why I think we really need to be full of the Ruach and let the Ruach lead us into sharing with others. Now, let's go back to the Parsha, and let's go down to verse 9, and we're going to look at his second dream. Okay. So we're going to go to, let me get mine up here. Genesis 37, and I'm going to start in verse 9. It says, he had another dream, which he told his brothers. Here I had another dream. You would think you would learn after the first one. It didn't go over so well with his brothers, and here I'm going to tell him another one. And there were the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars prostrating themselves before me. And he told his father too, as well as his brothers, but his father rebuked him. What is this dream you've had? Do you really expect me, your mother, and your brothers to come around and prostrate ourselves before you on the ground? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. And so, you think, like I said, you would think you would have learned the first time the dream didn't go over so well with his brothers. Now you have had this another dream and you're telling your brothers again. Not the wisest of decisions here. But let's look at verse 11. His brothers had this jealousy, this envy toward him. But it says that his father, Shomer, he was guarding, Shamar, he was actually guarding the word, is what it's saying in Hebrew. So Yaakov didn't just, throw this word away or put it on a shelf. I think he was guarding it. And if you're guarding something, you understand the importance of it. I think he really understood the picture that Yosef was showing through this dream. He was, he understood that, and he's guarding it in his heart. And first of all, when we look at this dream, it says, the moon, Yarek, and the sun, Shemesh, and the Kochavim, the stars, are all mentioned together. Okay, so you've got these three things here that are mentioned together. Well, let's go back to the first mention. Where do we see the moon, the sun, and the stars first mentioned together? Well, we're in Genesis, and it's got to be before this. So, of course, it's in Genesis chapter 1. So I'm going to go all the way back to Genesis chapter 1. And we're going to go to verse 14. This is the part of the creation account. And Elohim said, let there be lights in the dome of the sky to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, seasons, days, and years. And let them be for the lights in the dome of the sky to give light to the earth. And this is how it was. And Elohim made two great lights, the larger to rule the day, the sun, the Shemesh, and the smaller light to rule the night, the moon, okay, and the stars. So again, we've got all three of these mentioned here in the creation story. And in verse 17, it says, and Elohim put them in the dome of the sky to give light to the earth. Okay, so the sun, the moon, and the stars, were lights in the sky. And we see in Joseph's dream that we know that each one of those are also representing a member of his family. And think about what it's connecting. Okay, if this is if this talking about your family, then what is your family supposed to do? They were chosen to be a nation to bring light to the nations. They were chosen as goyim, a light to the nations. We also see this in Isaiah chapter 42. In verse 5. 42, verse 5. Thus says Elohim, who created the heavens and spread them out, who stretched out the earth and all that grows from it, who gives breath to the people on it and spirit to those who walk on it. I, called you righteously. I took hold of you by the hand. I shaped you and I made you a covenant for the people to be a light for the nations. Okay. So that you can open blind eyes, free the prisoners from confinement, those living in darkness from the dungeon. I am Yah, That is my name. I yield my glory to no one else, nor my praise to any idol. So just like Yaakov, Joseph, and this family was called to be a light to the nations, we see that Isaiah, Yeshayahu, the prophet, was also called to be a light to the nation, and to show forth and bring them back to his ways. So Joseph's second dream not only is about his family, but it's also about his family being what? Being a light and keeping the promises of the covenant. So it's taking on a little deeper of a meaning, not just, oh, that you're going to bow down to me and I'm going to be head over this family. No, we're to be the sun, the moon, and the stars. We're to be the lights to the world. It's about all of us in the family being a light. We're not all called to the same job, the same position, because some of us are hands, some of us are feet, some of us are eyes, and each one of us has a different role there, a different job to do, but we're all part of the body. And it's not that we shouldn't be envious of the other. Now, two, we can look at Yeshua, because Joseph is a picture of Yeshua. Yeshua is the Mashiach, and he's often referred to as Mashiach ben Yosef. And he is our light. And it is through him that we're able to fulfill the promise to be a light to the nations. And we see him saying this in the Brit Hadashah. There's a couple of different passages. So let's go to John chapter 8 and verse 12 is one. And it says, Yeshua spoke to them again. And what does he say? He says, I am the light of the world, and whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have light, which gives life. Okay. So he's saying, I'm the light of the world. And if you follow me, you're not going to be in darkness. You're going to have that light. And not only that, but we see in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 14, he says, you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. So we aren't to be hiding our light. Our light should be shining through us. But sometimes we have to watch about where we're planting those seeds. Don't cast your pearls before the swine, so to speak. Let the Ruach lead us. And he will lead you to who you speak to, who to go to, what to say. Now, another thing that, I was really thinking about with these two dreams here too, that these two dreams are also a picture of the two comings of Yeshua, being Hamashiach. And if we think about, the first coming here, the first dream that, we see that is talking about Yeshua coming in the flesh and serving. Well, what did Yeshua do? Yeshua came to serve the first time. And in Joseph's dream, he says to his brother, we were binding sheaves in the field. And the fact that he says, we in the dream, it seemed he and his brothers were out in the field. They were working together to bind up the sheaves. So, when Yeshua came, he took off that robe, because for Joseph to be doing that with his brothers, he couldn't have on that robe, that long tunic. Then he had to take it off. He was emptying himself, and he was becoming a servant. He was being like his brothers. And here in that dream, he said, we were doing that. So he was working alongside of his brothers doing that. And we can see that, like I said, that this was taking that robe off, that he was emptying himself and becoming like man, just like happened in this dream. And you think about what he did there. What did he do when he came? Yeshua says, I came only for the lost sheep of Israel. So in other words, he was coming to seek and save, and to, that which was lost, and to bind up his set apart ones, like binding up these sheaves. so that he could prepare them for his second coming. And if you look at Joseph's second dream, being the sun, the moon, and the stars all bowing down to him, of course, like we just said, this was a metaphor for his family bowing down to him. And his father even asked, Yaakov even asked, how could this be? Because your mother's dead. How is your mother going to do this? If she's going to be the moon, how is she going to do this when she was already dead? And this is another picture of what is going to happen when Yeshua returns for gathering his sheep. What happens when he's returning to get those sheep? Because Joseph's mother was dead. How is she going to bow down? Well, let's go to the Brit Hadashah in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. So 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and verse 16. This one you may be familiar with. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a rousing cry and with a call from one of his ruling angels and with Elohim's shofar. And those who died united with the Mashiach will be the first to rise. Okay, so think about what he's saying here. Oh my goodness, Rahel, she was dead. But we can see in this prophetic dream that she was going to be raised at the resurrection and bow in submission to the king. Okay. And so, if we're going back to the Parsha, after, Joseph's first dream, his brothers hated him, didn't really want to accept him being ruler over them. And think about when Yeshua came, his brothers, for the most part, rejected him as a whole, as a nation. But you remember the first believers, of course, were his brothers. They were, from Yehuda. So you think about, just that same parallel that's there. In John chapter 1 again, I want to go back to this verse. John 1 and verse 10. So John 1 and verse 10 said, he was in the world, and the world came to be through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own homeland, yet his own people did not receive him. And that was the same thing that happened with Joseph and his brothers. When he first came, his own brothers didn't really receive him the way he was to be received. And Joseph, had this revelation, and he learns, I think, in a hard way that, that telling his revelation, telling this dream, ended up resulting him being sold into slavery. And like I said, that we have to let the Ruach lead us, the Spirit lead us, is sometimes who we're sharing these revelations with. Okay, so let's go to Genesis 37. And I'm going to go back to verse 12. Is where I'm going to start. And after this, when his brothers had gone to pasture their father's sheep in Shechem, Israel asked Joseph, aren't your brothers pasturing the sheep in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. He answered, here I am. And he said, go now and see whether things are going well with your brothers and with the sheep, and bring back word to me. So he sent him away from the Hebron Valley, and he went to Shechem, where he found a man found him wandering among the countryside. And the man asked him, what are you looking for? I'm looking for my brothers, he answered. Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the sheep? And the man said, they've gone from here, because I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. And Joseph went after his brothers, and he found them in Dothan. They spotted him in the distance, and before he had arrived where they were, they had already plotted to kill him. And they said to each other, look, this dreamer is coming. So come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of those water cisterns here. Then we'll say some wild animal devoured him, and we'll see what becomes of his dreams. But when Reuben heard this, he saved him from being destroyed by them, and he said, we shouldn't take his life. Don't shed blood. Reuben added, throw him in the cistern here in the wilds. Don't lay hands on him yourselves. And he intended to rescue them later from them and restore him to his father. Okay. So again, we've got, they've already got this plot going of what they're going to do. In verse 23, so it was that when Joseph arrived to be with his brothers, they stripped off his robe, this long sleeve robe that he was wearing, and took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty without any water in it. And they sat down to eat their meal. Okay, I'm going to stop right there for a minute. So first we see that Yaakov is asking him and saying, wait a minute, where are your brothers? Your brothers are supposed to be in Shechem. So Joseph's brothers were to go to Shechem, and Shechem means back or shoulder. Okay. And if you think Shechem is the part that actually is carrying a load or a yoke. And so the brothers were not at Shechem, but they went to Dotan. And Dotan in Hebrew means two wells. So think about what this is saying. They were not about their father's business, but they went somewhere else. They were about their own. Okay. And how true of this is this today? That there are so many shepherds out there today, and they're not really about the father's business. They're about building their own and getting all the pleasures that you could get in Dotan. And I'm not going to go into Dotan, but it is about meeting their own needs and getting what they could get. And so Yaakov sends Joseph to go check on his brothers, because remember, he's already checked on his brothers before and brought back a bad report. But I want to look at verse 14 a minute, because 14 says something interesting, I think, in Hebrew. So I want to go back to verse 14. And my version read it. He said to him, go now, see whether these things are going well with your brothers and with the sheep, and bring back word to me. So I'm going to stop right there. Okay. He says, so go now and see whether things are going well with your brothers. Okay. Now, when you're looking at that in Hebrew, when he's telling him to go now and see, okay, it actually says, Lech na re'eh et shalom achecha. Okay. And this verse can be read, Lech, go. Na, please. And re'eh, see. Et shalom, this peace. Acheha is your brothers. Okay. So he's saying, go please and see the peace or shalom of your brothers. So what is he really saying to Joseph? Go and make peace with your brothers. Well, isn't that what the Brit Hadashah tells us? That Yeshua tells us there's this way of handling these conflicts that we have with our brothers. Let's go to Matthew chapter 18. Okay, so Matthew chapter 18. And we're going to go down to verse 15. Moreover, if your brother commits a sin against you, go and show him his fault, but privately, just between the two of you. If he listens to you, you have won back your brother. If he doesn't listen, take one or two others with you, so that every accusation can be supported by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. And then it goes on to, if he refuses to hear them, then tell the congregation. And if he refuses to listen to even to the congregation, treat him as you would a pagan or a tax collector. And so here, Yaakov is saying, go ahead and go make peace with your brothers. And so how does he do that? He has to do that privately, just between them. Okay, let's go back to the story in the Parsha. So Genesis 37, or 37, and I'm going to go to verse 25. That's where I stopped. Then they sat down to eat their meal. But as they looked up, they saw in front of them a caravan of Ishmaelim coming from Gilead, and their camels were loaded with aromatic gum, healing resin, opium, and on their way down to Mitzrayim. Because remember, this is along the trade route, the spice trade route. And Yehuda said to his brothers, "What advantage is it to us if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelim instead of putting him to death with our own hands. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers paid attention to him. So when the Midianite merchants passed by, they drew and lifted Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 1/2 pound of silver shekels to the Ishmaelim, who took Joseph on to Mitzrayim. Now, it seemed harsh, when I was reading this, that his brothers, after throwing him in this cistern into this pit, that they sit down to eat. But again, this is a picture of what happened to Yeshua. Because think about this. When was he crucified? Pesach. Yeah, he was crucified at Pesach. And so after Yeshua died, what did his brothers, what did Yehuda do? What did the Yehudim do? They would have sat down and eaten the Pesach meal. Okay. And so that was the exact same thing. And the brothers, and think about what happened here. Joseph is not going to see his brothers again until he's gone away into Mitzrayim here and prepared a place for deliverance for them. So he doesn't see them again until he's got this place prepared for them to be delivered. And in the same way, Yeshua goes away, our bridegroom is going away to do what? To prepare a place for us. And in Matthew, he says, what? You are not going to see me again until you say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And so he's telling them that, the same thing. You're not going to see me again until I've got this place ready. You're not going to see, Joseph isn't going to see his brothers again until he's got the place ready, the preparation ready for their redemption. Now, we get to chapter 38, and here's where it seems like there is a interruption. There's this disconnect because it goes over and is starting to talk about Yehuda. And then it returns in chapter 39 to talk about Joseph. And this year, I'm not going to really go into chapter 38 talking about Yehuda and Tamar, but it is actually happening at the same time that the story is happening with Joseph. Okay. So we see, after Joseph is gone down into Mitzrayim, this is happening at the same time. And so, like I said, I'm not going to go through the story of Yehuda and Tamar, but instead I want to just focus on Joseph this year. And so let's go on to chapter 39. Okay. And we're not going to, for the sake of time, we're not going to read all of chapter 39 here. But we do know that Joseph, ends up in Egypt, in Mitzrayim, and he ends up in Potiphar's house. And he ends up in this precarious situation in Potiphar's house. So let's go Genesis 39, and I want to go down to verse 10. And here we see Potiphar's wife, and it says, but she kept pressing him day after day. Nevertheless, he didn't listen to her. He refused to sleep with her or even be with her. However, one day when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men living in the house were there indoors, she grabbed him by his robe and said, sleep with me. But he fled, leaving his robe in her hand, and he got himself outside. Okay, so now wait a second. So think about what's happening here and how the link between what we just read in 37 and now we've got 39, there's something that's still the same. And if you look at verse 13, you can see what is the same here. She's got this robe. When she saw that he had left his robe in her hand and had escaped, she's crying out. So this robe, his garment, is actually what's going to be used to identify him. It is the marker that's identifying him as the culprit or the person here. So you go back to Genesis 37. What was this robe? This was that, you think about that robe that identified him, that ketunet pasim that the brothers took back to their father. There was a garment that identified him amongst his brothers, okay, as the person that was the culprit. And now he's got a garment in Egypt, and it is used to identify him. And I wanted to look at one more link here because I didn't make this earlier when I was talking about that coat of many colors, that ketunet pasim, but I think it also has a connection too. Let me go back to this. Okay. So ketunet, that garment, is, like I said, is a tunic. It's usually made of linen. But the root of the word ketunet is kataf. And kataf means shoulder, side, a slope, or support. Okay. And pasim, like I said, is not really color. Zeva is color. So when we look at pasim means that palm of the hand. A lot of times, it's interpreted being striped, or a tunic is reaching to the palms or the soles. Okay. But actually, the root of that word, where does that word pasim, pas come from, is pasas, which means to disappear or to vanish or to cease. And by looking at the roots of those words, I think, this is another meaning here that we can uncover is, remember that Joseph is a picture of the Mashiach. And let me go back. Let's go back to Genesis 37 and verse 3, because I do want to look at that verse. So Genesis 37 and verse 3, since I didn't bring this up earlier. Now, Israel loved Joseph most of all of his children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a long-sleeved robe. Okay, so he made him a ketunet pasim. Okay, so think about if we take the root meanings here and put them in this verse. Yaakov, the father, made him, what is a ketunet, a support. And what is pasas? What is the root meaning of the word pasas? Disappear. So looking at that verse with the root meanings, it says, and he made him, Mashiach, a support that is going to disappear or go away. And, even, in the Parsha, of course, John is saying the same thing. He says that, I'm doing all these things, but I'm going to go away. Let me go there. In John, see, chapter 14. Okay, 14 and verse 12, he says, yes, indeed, I will tell you that whoever trusts in me will also do the works I do. Indeed, he will do greater ones because I'm going to the Father. If we go down to verse 28, he also says, you heard me tell you, I'm leaving, but I will come back to you. If you love me, you would have been glad that I'm going to the Father because the Father is greater than I. I also have said to you now before it happens, so that when it does happen, you will trust or you will have faith. So think about, that ketunet pasim is also giving us this prophetic picture that we're going to have. He made him a ketunet. He's making Yosef is a picture of the Mashiach. He's making him a support that is going to go away. He's going to disappear. But even the Mashiach tells us that we need to keep our faith. We need to maintain our faith there. And remember, every word in Hebrew has Hebrew letters have numerical values. Okay. And so when you look at Ketunet is Kaf, which is 20, Tav, which is 400, Nun, 50, and Tav, 400. So the value of Ketunet is 870. Pasim is written with a pay, which is 80. Samek is 60. Yud is 10. And Mem is 40. So Pasim is 190. And, when things have the same value, the sages say that there's a connection between them. And interestingly, when you look at this, there is a couple, well, there's many words, but one word that has this connection there is the word Zaphon. The Zaphon in Hebrew means hidden, talking about the hidden ones. And it has the value of 870 for the Ketunet. And Pasim has the same value as the word Ketz, which is the word end. And if you think about the story of Yosef, is also, like I said, portraying the story of the house of Yehuda and the house of Ephraim or Yosef. And in verse 3 in Genesis 37, verse 3, where it says that he is talking about Yosef, and he's also saying he made him a Ketunet Pasim. Well, put in another meaning here. We've also got another layer. Filling in with these other words, we've now got he made who? He's not also a picture of Yeshua, but he's also a picture of Ephraim, the house of Ephraim, the northern kingdoms. He's making him what? Well, think about what's also this Ketunet Pasim. The same value is what? Hidden at the end. He's made the house of Ephraim hidden until the end. And it's amazing that the different layers within the Hebrew that you can see when you start digging, and it's pulling out these other meanings and these other prophecies that are related on a different level. And that word Zaphon, we can see in Psalms 83. In Psalms 83, and depending on your version, it may be verse 3. I know that King James is in verse 3, and other versions, I know, like the Complete Jewish Bible, it is in verse 4. So it says, they craftily conspire against your people, consulting together against those you treasure. Okay. And, when you look at that, that word treasure there is actually, the way they word it there is treasure is zefonecha, which is your sheltered ones or your hidden ones, your protected ones. So in the end times, what's going to happen? Israel's enemies are going to come against the Zephoneha, the hidden ones. Well, what's happening in the end times? The end times, the enemy is going to come against the house of Ephraim. And, to come full circle, I guess you can say that, Joseph is also given another name. You remember, he's given a name by Pharaoh when he's ruling in Egypt. If we go ahead, let's go there over, and this is going to be in a later Parsha, Miketz, which is actually Miketz, which is at the end. Okay, from the end, at the end here, Miketz, in Genesis 41:45. Pharaoh called Joseph by the name Zaphanat Panecha, and he gave him as his wife Osnat, the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On. Okay, so here we've got Joseph's other name by Pharaoh is called Zaphanat Panecha, which is from Zephonot is from the root Zephon, which means hidden. And what, Joseph's identity was hidden in Mitzrayim. And Paneha, is, when you think about, he's the hidden one. Zephonot Paneha was the hidden one that Yah hid in its Egypt, in Mitzrayim, so Israel might be saved. And in the end, Ephraim is hidden. In the end, Ketz, Ephraim is being the hidden one, Zephaniah, as the enemy of Israel are coming against them. And we're hidden there for a reason. Okay. Let's get back to where we were. I know that's not necessarily, something to think about there, but I just wanted to, look here at the end, because think about Joseph, he was imprisoned, but the whole time that he was imprisoned, he found Yah's favor while he was there. He was raised up to a position of authority over the other prisoners. And we see Joseph's encounter in this Parsha here at the end with the baker and the cupbearer, and how Yah uses him to reveal the meaning of their dreams. So of course the first one gives him his dream, and it's all, great. The meaning that Joseph reveals seems to be all great. So of course the second one's giving his dream, and he's thinking, oh, well, he got the great, meaning. I'm going to get the same thing. And of course it was not so great, the second one. And, here, even though Joseph reveals the meaning of their dreams, he actually says Yah is the interpreter of the dreams here. It's only through Yah. And another picture we have of Yeshua, Joseph was there, and we see specifically mentioned the baker and the cupbearer, these two prisoners. And, they were considered criminals. They were in a prison. So Joseph is there with these two criminals, just as Yeshua was hung with two criminals. And, Joseph asked to be remembered, when the cupbearer is released. And after the cupbearer had been, released or restored, he forgot about Joseph. And again, this is a picture, a lesson for us, that don't forget or don't neglect to do that which we say we will do. If someone asks us to pray for them or whatever, don't just say, okay, I'm going to do it, and don't do it. Stop, take a minute, go ahead and pray. Don't neglect to do it, because sometimes people get so caught up in everything, and then they remember long after the fact. So, and I think this is, a lesson for us to remember. So, like, I did not want to go into the story of Yehuda and Tamar in this one. I just really wanted to focus on Joseph. And, as we're going to continue with Joseph in the Parashas after this. And as we look at the life of Joseph here, the story holds much more than just history and what happened with Joseph. This story is a prophetic picture of Yeshua, HaMashiach. And it is also a prophetic picture of the two houses of Israel. And, so we can look at scripture, and a lot of times we read it and we're just reading it on this plain level. And this is just straight history, and that's what happened. And then, sometimes we look at it and we're like, oh, we look at it just at this one level. Oh, it's only talking about Yeshua. This, Joseph is a picture of Yeshua. But then we totally miss that there's another level, and that Joseph is also a picture of the southern kingdom. And so there's multiple layers to this. And so as you're going through reading these scriptures and thinking about them, and digesting them and digging into them, open your heart, open your eyes to see that what Yah is revealing, and to see if he can reveal something new and more deeper to you, and how do you apply that to your life? Because hopefully there were so many little nuggets in here. I didn't want to spend a lot of time, but I did want to go through the gist of this with you on this Parsha. So may you be blessed. I'm going to end there. I know my husband is not here to say the blessing for you, but I do. I want to end with the Shema, and so how about we just say the Shema here? Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Ahad. Baruch Shem Kavod Mahuto Leolam Vayed. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Blessed be his glorious name, whose kingdom is forever and ever. Vayeshev at.I Elohecha, b'kol levacha, b'kol nevashecha, b'kol meodecha. And you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all your might, with all your soul and with all your might. Vayahu hadevarim ha'ele asher enoki mitzvatecha hayom al panecha. And these words, which I command you today, shall be in your heart. And let us diligently teach them to our children when we sit in the house and when we walk by the way and when we lie down and when we rise up. And let us bind them for a sign upon our hand and let them be frontlets between our eyes. And let us write them on the post of our house and on our gates. Amen. So Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Hope you had a great day. And like I said, hope you get something from this teaching. May you have a blessed Shabbat. If you have questions or something, please contact me. And Shavua Tov after the Shabbat is over. So bless you. Shabbat Shalom.